Hey, I'm Nick, and in this video, I talk with Holly Tate of Vanderbloemen Search Group, and we talk all about church online and digital and a strategy for leveraging online better. We talk about content marketing. What is content marketing? I think Vanderbloemen does it really, really well. And so, how do they do it, and how could we, as church leaders, leverage that same strategy in our churches to reach more people? Now, Vanderbloemen primarily helps churches find staff. And so we also talk about staffing in the digital church world. What are the positions that churches should look for? Holly talks about how the vision for being a digital first church should come from leadership at the top. And she shares the one position that she thinks most churches should staff for if they want to do online and digital better. And what you'll find is it's a little unique. It's not just about digital. It's more of an encompassing position that oversees more than digital and looks at everything all together. And I have to tell you, I agree with everything she says. I think it's a very wise advice for churches. Now, this interview is part of some bonus content related to the New Digital Church course. If you're interested, check out newdigitalchurch.com and go ahead and subscribe to this channel if you want to see the other free videos in this series. If this interview is helpful to you, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, Nick Blevins here. I'm here with Holly Tate. Welcome, Holly.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself and Vanderbloemen.
Yeah, well, I'm the Vice President of Business Development and Marketing at a company called Vanderbloemen, and we help churches and Christian organizations build their best teams. So that is what I spend my day, all day, every day doing. I've been on the team for 8 years. We've been around for 10 years. So been here from almost from the beginning, and it's just a blast to help churches find the right people.
Yeah, and it's grown a lot tremendously. And one of the reasons I wanted to reach out and talk with you was because we want to help churches think better digitally. What are some things that are just not happening or weren't happening years ago in churches that were happening in the business world to leverage online and reach people and connect people and things like that? And one of those is with content. You do staffing. You're primarily, like you said, helping churches that way. But I have noticed from afar that you create content in a big way. And you can search almost anything related to church sometimes, and there you'll find something from Vanderbloemen. And in the business world, that might be called content marketing. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what content marketing is for somebody who's like, I've never heard that phrase, especially in the church. And what does it look like at Vanderbloemen?
Well, I'm so glad that you're having these conversations, Nick, because it is a shift. We are now a shift that we probably should have taken about 10 years ago in the church world. We have now been forced to think digital first. And I'm really thankful. It's unfortunate that it took a pandemic and a crisis that we're currently in, but there's so much opportunity to reach more people and build further disciples through this digital first mentality. And so I'm so grateful that you're hosting these conversations so we can dive in. And I mean, content marketing is communicating to your audience. That's what it is. It's thinking about who am I trying to reach? What is keeping them awake at night? And how can I provide resources and solutions to help them overcome those challenges and those obstacles? And so from a ministry perspective, that looks like our church or our ministry putting ourselves in the shoes of our community, our church congregation, our seekers that we're trying to reach, and thinking about what are the challenges that they're facing and how can I create resources to help them overcome that. And content is how we do it. It looks like a million different things in this multi-channel world where you've got email and your website and social media and everything in between. There's so many ways to create content, but essentially it's just the way that you communicate to your audience.
And in the business world, you and I were talking about this, how there's whole teams that do this. And a lot of times there could be a disconnect from what the company actually does and then the content they're putting out to try to reach you, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And there's usually some kind of connection. I mean, you don't have like the tire sale company creating something about food, nutrition or whatever.
Hopefully not.
But they know hopefully not. It's probably not very good. But they know that they have to reach you somewhere. So the problem you might be interested in is not exactly what they're going to help you with, but they know if they can connect with you, they can eventually help you with the real issue. In the church world, though, that's easier because the same things we want to reach them with are the things that we want to help them with. But like, for example, when I think about you guys with Vanderbloemen, I could be searching something on Google related to ministry. Could be about children's ministry, student ministry, lead pastor, executive pastor, church online. I mean, staffing, like there's lots of things. And it's very common that you all would show up in the search results because you've created content that helps with whatever I'm searching, even though ultimately, especially from the early days, you were a staffing company primarily. So talk a little bit about that connection. Like, how do you know as a church what we should create to help reach people and communicate with them? How does that connect to what we're already doing? Like, what should that look like?
Absolutely. Well, I just want to encourage everyone watching this. You have the advantage. Churches have the advantage from a content marketing or communication standpoint, because what are you doing every week? You're creating content. There is a sermon or some type of worship content experience that your church is creating on a weekly basis. And so I just want to encourage ministry leaders to, rather than thinking about all of this new or additional content that we have to create, because that's where it can be exhausting. It's like, we're already getting ready for Sunday. I already don't have, enough hours in the day. I've never met a ministry leader that just wants to raise their hand to put more on their to-do list because we're all overloaded. It's not about adding to your plate. It's going, wait a second, we're already creating this content through our small groups and our Bible studies and our worship experience and our sermons and, our daily devotionals that we might send out, whatever that might be, and figuring out how to recycle that and reach our audience in the way that they most want to. I wish that I could say, Nick, when I started at Vanderbloemen 8 years ago, that I had some very sophisticated strategy. I didn't. I literally would take my coffee every morning and I would sit in front of my computer and I would go to HubSpot.com and I would read their blog and I would read what they posted that day. And then I would go, how can I implement that for church leaders, to reach church leaders? Because the concept here, Nick, is the old way of media and marketing and communications was disruptive. It was, even for the church world, let's buy billboards, let's send out mailers, let's do TV commercials, let's, knock on doors. And while there's nothing wrong with any of that, it's very expensive. Often it's a lot of time or financial investment. And it also disrupts people rather than meets them where they already are. And that's the beauty of content marketing. It's just showing up where your audience is already searching for solutions. So that's online, that's on social media, it's their email inbox. You're showing up where they are. And so what I set out to do here at Vanderbloemen was, especially 8 years ago, what we were doing was still, and it still is, 8 years later, it's still a new idea for the church world. The executive search and staffing solution has been around in the business world for decades, but for the church and ministry world, it's still a fairly new idea. And so we really had to educate our audience about what even is executive search. Are we taking the place of the Holy Spirit? Like, all of those big, valid questions that we were having to tackle in those early days. And so I knew that we needed to build trust. We needed to show we are people who are passionate about the kingdom of God and equipping churches to fill their open positions so that they can reach more people for the gospel. That is what we're setting out to do. And that might look like, first, they're struggling with their family or children's ministry. And maybe they're looking for a person, but at the end of the day, they're really looking for engaging, ideas over the summer with children and families. Maybe it's they don't know how to run an operational budget. And so how can we resource them to really figure out when is it time to hire? And how do I look at my budget and know if I can afford to add a new person to my team? And so that took a lot of listening. The best marketers and communicators are the best listeners, Nick. This is critical for anybody that is in a leadership role, especially if you're in a marketing or communications role. You have got to be listening to your persona. And so persona is a big, one of my soapboxes. It is really important that your church knows exactly who you're trying to reach. Nick, what do you think the answer is when I often ask church leaders, like, hey, who are you guys trying to reach? What do you think they say?
Oh, I know what they say. They say everybody.
Everybody, right? And it's because that's how we often have read the Great Commission. It's go into all nations and make disciples, right? Like, it's pretty clear. I think sometimes what we miss though is that if we're all trying to reach everyone, we're not going to reach anyone, because our messaging is so broad that it doesn't hit the heart of that person that's on the other side of that screen, on the other side of that coffee table from us, whatever that might look like. And so God has uniquely called and gifted us to reach a certain subset of his people. And it's us to figure out, how has God uniquely wired and gifted and resourced our church to reach? And then once we get clear on that, that's where we can really skyrocket our content strategy. So to answer your question, in the early days, I just started thinking about somebody named Pastor Paul. This was a fictional guy, Pastor Paul. And I just thought, what kind of car does Pastor Paul drive? What news sources does he look to? What are his trusted advisors or podcasts that he listens to? What blogs does he read? What magazines does he subscribe to? What is keeping him awake at night? What wakes him up at 3 a.m. and is churning in his brain about his ministry world? And how can we help him overcome that? So there wasn't any big SEO, strategy. It was literally just, and I think that's empathetic marketing. That's putting ourselves in the shoes of the person we're trying to reach and creating resources to help them overcome it. And then, of course, over the years, we've gotten a little bit more sophisticated as we've grown, as I've grown, and been able to learn more about, using data that Google has to show us what are people searching and how are they coming to our churches. For you guys, for us, it's the Vanderbloemen website. For those that are watching, their church's website or Google page. And how can we just make it easier for them to find the solutions that they're looking for?
Yeah, definitely. Let's think about it practically, because like you're kind of alluding to there, you probably have more of a strategy now than you did back when you just checked HubSpot or whatever. But if we think about the persona, or sometimes in the business world, they might call it a customer avatar, like that ideal person they're trying to reach. Again, we want to reach as many as we can. But for a lot of churches, I know it's, I've a church that's around here, they want to reach the 25-year-old guy, which is I've heard a lot of people say, I want to reach the 35-year-old guy that is married with kids. Or, you know what I mean? There's different kind of avatars there. So if we get clear on that, which is a big step, and a lot of churches watching this probably haven't done that. But if we do that, and then we start thinking about the content and what's going to help them and meet them where they are, I'd love to have kind of two things from you. One, what does it look like now with Vanderbloemen that you have more of a strategy to it? And then how could churches apply a bit of a strategy to it, especially knowing that we do have this content? So unlike maybe in your case, we don't have to create it all separate, from scratch.
Yes.
We could maybe take what we already did, but I think people watching could use some help thinking, okay, what do I do with it though? Like, how
Absolutely.
do I apply that?
Yes, I love practical steps for sure. So I'm so glad you asked. Well, the foundation has not changed. And what that for me is, again, it's listening to the needs of our customers or the people who we're trying to reach. So that Pastor Paul, we have board member Barb. She's the lay leader, the search committee member, the board member, right? And so a tangible example of this was actually, recently during COVID-19, when churches were no longer able to gather in person, obviously giving suffered for a lot of churches. And there's a lot of fear, and still is, now that we're still kind of figuring out what's going to happen to the economy, of are we going to be able to pay payroll? Are we going to be able to pay, keep the church open? Well, open as far as, it's closed, but running.
Yeah.
And so when the government came out with the Paycheck Protection Program, we were getting a lot of questions around this because it was so confusing. They wrote this bill in like 3 days, right? I mean, there were conflicting instructions. It was very confusing, especially for faith-based organizations, because typically churches and faith-based organizations are not included in government stimulus plans. And so what I'm saying is the foundation has not changed in that we're always paying attention to what questions our audience is asking. Even if it's not directly related to hiring, we just want to be a resource and serve in whatever way we can. And for us during quarantine, that was the Paycheck Protection Program. And so me and our COO and our director of finance, I can't take any credit. I was just there to help ask questions. Our COO literally read the entire bill from like page to page to page. It was amazing. And they set out to answer questions for faith-based organizations. So every week we did a Facebook Live. And that we were able to kind of become this hub and this resource for faith-based leaders and pastors that were asking like questions like, what about my housing allowance? And what about seasonal employees like camp workers, and all of these questions that are so specific to churches that the business world doesn't have to think about. And so that's the foundation that I hope never changes. I just want to encourage everybody who is listening. It's just putting yourself in your audience's shoes, listening to them. What questions are they asking, and how can you be a resource? Now, to build on that with a little bit more of an advanced strategy, then it's going, okay, we're talking about the Paycheck Protection Program. What data can I look at to make sure that when we're publishing the title of a video, or we're publishing a blog recap, because we would do that, we would do a Facebook Live. And then if you're like me, I actually don't love to watch full videos. I like to read the recaps because I'm a little ADD. And so we would do a blog recap. And so, and rather than just, taking a guess at what the title should be, we wanted to be intentional about that, so that we showed up in Google when pastors and church leaders were searching for the Paycheck Protection Program. So that's what informed the strategy side was, okay, we know this is a need. We're getting lots of questions about this. But then as we're creating our content, how can we do it with excellence to make sure we're actually showing up where people are already searching, through our titles, through our headers? And that's getting like really in the weeds there. There's lots of resources online where you can just search, how to optimize a blog post for SEO, and dive deep into that. But that's where the intentionality side comes in.
Yeah, and in the church world, I think, before they even had to get too deep in that SEO and search and all that, which is definitely something that we want churches to think about, because, and this is something that I know that I'm talking about separately, is you could have targeted ads for people who search that in your area. Like, you're not necessarily trying to reach, the church in Florida, if you're in California, with people that are searching for, felt need things, hope, right? Depression, mental health, things that, churches need to be in the conversation with, and can absolutely help people like that. There's ways to do that, but there are also other ways that I think, and again, you guys do this at Vanderbloemen in different ways, because you write an article about Paycheck Protection Program. That's what they need right now. So you create content around it. You optimize it, like you said, for search. I don't know if you ran ads to it, but you could. But even in the church world, I think about, like, right now when we're having this conversation in August of 2020, if I'm at my church, I know one thing that is a felt need for people is, if you're a parent and you have kids that are going to school and it's online, or you get a homeschool, or I don't know, there's just so many questions, so much stress and tension and anxiety around that you could, as a church, say, hey, I'm going to back it up, create some kind of content for that. You could even go back to, what if we did a teaching series on anxiety, but we also created this resource for parents, because we know that's what they're talking about, gave it to all our parents, told them to share it, ran ads to it, right? That's probably maybe an example of taking that vision of how you can help somebody, and then playing it all the way out through the process, and using that content well, right? Does that sound good?
Yes. Oh yeah, Nick. And that's such a great point. And I think that's what you just said. It could be a breakthrough for a lot of people listening right now. And this is why it's so important that cross church wide, you're talking to your other team members who are on the front line. So for example, what you just said, maybe you're watching this and you're the communications director at your church, and you don't talk with a lot of the parents on a day-to-day basis. It's so important that you're having regular meetings with your departmental leaders, and you are asking them, what questions are you getting from parents? Or your small group leader, what questions are you getting from small group leaders? What are the prayer requests that we're seeing come through? What are people asking for prayer for? That feeds into your content strategy, because you're literally meeting the needs of the people that you're serving. And so that's a great idea that you just said. And another practical tip, Nick, that I just thought of too was, I think it's important that we think a little bit differently. I'm seeing a lot of churches. Well, first of all, we all had to just pivot very quickly with very minimal resources. And so a lot of us, the bare minimum of what we could do was just stream online. And that's great. And we actually did a post Paycheck Protection Program survey. Before COVID, it was a small number of churches that were had any, I think it was less than 25% of churches, it was probably even lower than that, had an online service or experience of some sort. Now it's like in the 90s, of course, right?
Yeah.
And that's not going to go away. People have realized, I think the fear before was if we stream, they're not going to come in person. What's that going to do to giving, et cetera? And now we're seeing that we can actually reach more people in more engaging ways on a regular basis if we can have that online component as well. But I think now that we've kind of gotten this rhythm and a lot of us have practice now with the streaming, I think we should get creative about how we are recycling and sharing that content. So maybe it doesn't look like an hour-and-a-half service streamed on Facebook or YouTube on Sundays, and maybe it does, but then you can break that sermon into snippets and share it on, Instagram, or direct video uploads onto Twitter or Facebook. And it's recycling that content in different ways so that it's shared in a way that your persona wants to receive it. I think that goes back to that persona, right? And putting ourselves in the shoes of the people we're trying to reach. Do they really want to sit down and watch an hour-and-a-half thing when they're probably sitting on Zoom at work all day? Or can we provide them with more creative ways to consume? And then what's most important, Nick, is that we transition into creating digital community. It's not just about consumption of content. It's about creating discipleship community online. And that's where I think we're really going to start to see momentum happen from a discipleship perspective if we can embrace this concept of digital first in a community aspect online.
Yeah, and that makes me think about I know one of the tensions that churches will feel is they think about, okay, I want to create a persona. We want to take our content and make it helpful to them and start to reach them in some new ways. One of the conversations I think churches have to have is, how are we reaching the people who aren't a part of our church? Because there's some things that translate, right? If like the parents who's stressed out about school, that doesn't matter if your kids are part of a church, you've never been in church, you're probably in the same boat. And you could reach them both with that same idea, content, whatever you're going to help them with. But then we probably need to do more listening to people who are outside the church and what do they need help with? What are they thinking about? What are they searching? Like you talked about analyzing search results in Google, like that could be helpful there. But the other thing I think about is the teams on churches. Sometimes you get a church that's watching this right now. It's one staff person. They're the one watching it. They're like, I got to figure this out with volunteers or myself. You got churches of 3,000 and they got multiple staff and somebody's a communications director, but the other person isn't responsible for the website. They are, and they have questions. You know what I mean? Like it just gets complex because for the longest time, and even still right now, it was like a department or a person or it was also the worship arts person's job. You know what I mean? When I think about church communications, and you know this, you guys staff churches.
Or whoever was under the age of 30, like whatever their job was, they're in charge.
Yeah. You know this stuff, right? Can you just handle all marketing and communications? So I don't know, what would you say though to people watching about how do we, in the same way that now we have adapted to get online better, going from under 25% to 90% plus, how can we also adapt so that online isn't this other job that the intern does? To it's more church-wide and we work together and have a strategy comprehensive, with everybody working on it?
This is a fantastic question, Nick, and it starts with the senior leader. So the senior leader has got to shift the mindset of the entire team, whether that's 2 people or 20 people or 200 people, to digital first. It's really difficult to change a culture if the senior pastor or senior leader is not bought in. I also think that it's critical that you have somebody on your leadership team, whether that's your executive pastor, it might be your senior pastor, or communications director, whatever that person is, they need to embody 2 strengths in one person. That's communication and strategy. Communication and strategy. I think this is key. I think where we miss a lot of times is we hire that entry-level marketing or communications person. They're left out of the leadership room. They get an email that where a conversation happened, in the boardroom, and the person who's actually executing the work has been left out of the vision conversation. And so then it's like a game of telephone. It's really difficult to translate that vision into reality if the person who's responsible for that reality is not in those conversations. So I think that there really needs to be somebody who has the gift of communication and strategy on the leadership team. And then if that communications person is not on the leadership team, they need to report to that person that's on the leadership team and have a direct line so that there's a clear link between the vision and the execution. And if you're at a church where you're like, okay, but I'm the church planner, I'm a bivocational pastor, I'm everything, I would encourage you to think about lay leaders. There's probably someone in your congregation who does marketing or communications for a living or has a passion for it, and leverage their expertise and their passion. Ask them to come along and give you guidance. You don't have to do it all yourself. I really don't want you to do it all yourself, because that's where we see burnout happen. So free yourself up to do what only you can do and outsource or delegate everything else possible.
Well, for churches that, and this is a lot of churches now, we had this conversation on our staff and our leadership team. We talked about how are we going to reorganize, restructure to prioritize digital more. I mean, we were already doing some of these things, but obviously COVID-19 did fast forward some things. And then there was that conversation of like, okay, whenever we're meeting again in person, how do we keep doing this? What are the things we're going to leave behind? We just knew we couldn't keep doing all of it without some staff changes. And so we restructured for sure. And we have what you said, which I'm thankful for, communications and strategy conversation represented there in our leadership team. But the other thing churches are going to want to do is hire. I know for us, a lot of the conversation has been just the restructure and then outsourcing. And that can certainly change down the road. But for this season, that's what we've been doing. But a lot of churches I know of are looking to hire. And either it's a position that's very tactical and pulling off something with video or online or whatever. A lot of them are strategic. I've seen, it was a church just recently that I know the kids pastor there, and they're hiring for kind of a digital marketing strategist or something like that, or a digital strategist, I think might be the title. So I'd love to hear from you, because obviously churches come to you when they're trying to figure this out. What are churches doing that you think, hey, that's great? These churches are sharp. They're thinking about this the right way. Are there some mistakes that churches are making? They're coming to you saying, hey, we need this. And you're like, actually, I think you need this. Like, give us a window into some of those conversations.
Yeah. So what I think the churches that are where I'm seeing this work the most effectively is they're thinking about a director or a pastor of experience. And this, I get so excited about the Grace Church in Orlando, Florida. Kelly there is their director of experience. She started as the communications director, but then they realized that communication is now, it's all about experience. And in the business world, we call this the flywheel, right? It's your sales, your marketing, and your customers' experience has to all be aligned. And all of that is marketing, because your customers, you want to find those raving fans and delight them and keep them inviting all their friends. And in the church setting, it's very similar. It's outreach, discipleship, small groups, and your congregation are your customers, for lack of a better word. So it's very different, but there's some similarities there from a best practices standpoint. And so I love seeing churches think about this experienced pastor or experienced director that kind of encompasses like creative arts and communications, and infuses the ethos of the organization through everything you're doing, because all of that is communications. I like to call it from the iPhone to the parking lot to the pew and back again. Like, that is the new communication director scope. And it's an entire experience. So that's one thing that I would encourage churches to think about. That role is likely going to be in a larger church setting, at least right now. I think where we see things going is that what's currently or has been the executive pastor is probably going to be more of that experienced pastor. I mean, they might still carry the title of executive pastor, but they're going to be forced to really think more strategically about the entire experience of a member or an attendee or a visitor, et cetera. The mistake that I'm seeing some churches make is think that they just need to fill an IT role because, technology, so let's get an IT person. IT can mean a million different things. Some people, when they say IT, they mean true IT, like security and servers and all of that really technical stuff that you really need to have a background in. Other people mean somebody that's a sound engineer. Other people mean a video producer. So I'd really encourage churches to step back and make a list of the responsibilities first. Before you put a job title on anything, it's super critical that you're making a list of what are the holes on our team? What is that stuff that needs to get done? Where is it going to fall on the org chart? And then you can back into what the title should be. Because as you're working on that, you might realize, like, wait a second, we actually need a communications director, and we can outsource or bring in a contract video person or We really do need a digital strategist because we really want to leverage more digital marketing practices, and we can wait on that sound engineer hire, whatever it might be. So that's where I would encourage everybody to start before you it's a part of restructuring, is creating all of those buckets of the stuff that has to get done. What's creating the biggest challenges for your current team right now? And then we can start to look at what are the seats that should be on the bus and who should be in them.
Yeah. Now, how about talk a little bit about the in-house outsource? I guess I'm thinking about how you're outsourcing certain roles and as contractors. But the other thing I think I'm thinking about is the difference between going out and finding and staffing one of these roles. A lot of times for this, you're not necessarily looking for like that church experienced person. You could have somebody in-house. You could still use help from an organization like you guys, because obviously you got to figure out how's that going to fit. There's still lots of that has to happen. But it could even be, I don't know, maybe you've done this. Churches are hiring people that aren't even from in their church, but it's also not from another church. It's from some kind of business background. Like that is obviously, if they want experience in this area, most of them aren't coming from churches because churches have been doing this for a long time. But like, what are you seeing there in terms of churches either looking in-house or hiring from the outside to fill these kinds of roles?
Absolutely. So you definitely want to keep your leadership and strategy in-house. And then my recommendation is initially to be able to outsource all of the technical stuff until you're paying to outsource what would be a full-time salary. And then I think that's where you can have that conversation of going, oh man, we're paying $50,000 on an annual basis for video production. Maybe it's time for us to look at bringing in a full-time video person that's on staff. And there's some nuances to that, but I think that's a great place to start, is to have that leader, that high capacity leader who can take that vision and make the strategy to bring that vision to life. That person's got to be in-house, but the technical stuff can be outsourced until it's time, until you're looking at the budget and going, maybe it's time for us to bring that person in-house. We, on the Vanderbloemen side, that's where we focus more on those leadership roles. So that person who's on the leadership team or reports to that person on the leadership team, that's going to be on our Vanderbloemen side. And we're seeing a lot of that's where the, pastor of experience or a high level creative director or high level communications director, pastor, that's going to be on the Vanderbloemen side. But actually this week when we're recording this, Nick, we just launched Christian Teams, which is our sister company, which is to answer the question that you're asking, where do we find those, video producers or media directors or coordinators, those people that are focused more on the tech and support side. That's what Christian Teams is in existence to do. And there are a lot, especially the next generation, Gen Z, some millennials, but especially Gen Z. There's a lot of them out there that have been doing freelance or contract. They have a passion for the church and would love to use their gifts for that. And so I'm really excited to see the next generation be able to step into those roles to really raise the level of excellence for our churches and help tell these amazing stories of what God is doing in our communities. So I hope that's helpful. But yes, we're seeing that on both the Vanderbloemen and the Christian Team side. We can help churches navigate, whether it's that leadership role or filling one of the support roles. We can help them do that, whichever area on the org chart they might sit.
Well, and I know one thing you all can help with, and that's what I'll probably wrap up here, is let us know how people can connect with you and connect with Vanderbloemen. They don't have to think, oh, I've got to hire right now, because one of the things you'll help churches with is the conversation. And I would recommend churches do that because, again, we don't want to get stuck in the same old ways where it's like, oh, yeah, how we've hired every other position. Let's look for that. Maybe it'd be good to just have a conversation with you guys to say, okay, how should we be thinking about this? I'm hearing you say hire that digital strategist, the person that's thinking of it from a leadership perspective and a strategy perspective. That's more important than the actual person doing it, doing video, doing content, doing this. And I totally agree. But that's the kind of conversation I know you guys can help churches with, even if they don't necessarily hire you to hire that role or whatever. But if they want to do that, if they want to get help hiring, staffing, restructure, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, you can email me, holly@vanderbloemen.com. You can email me and I'd be glad to have this conversation or connect you with somebody on our team that can. That's what we're here for, is just to be a resource and support you so that you can make sure you're building the best team possible and can have the greatest impact in your community for Christ.
That's awesome. Well, I happened to be on a Zoom call not too long ago where I heard your founder, William, say that a lot of your mantra the last number of months was serve, don't sell. And just love
Yes.
that. Appreciate that so much. And you've done that. When I've watched a number of your webinars about Paycheck Protection Program and other things. And when I've gone to the site too, it's like Netflix. You've done
Yeah.
so much free content. It's awesome. And so I just appreciate what you do for the church and adding Christian teams. That's a great idea. That's another need that we need in the church to be able to get those outsourced roles. We're doing that. Our elementary director's daughter edits our videos, our service every
That's
week. And
awesome.
so I
Yes.
don't know what we'd do without her. So we're like, we need more of that. And I know there are churches that don't have that connection. So, the resource you're providing is a good one. So thanks for the time and thanks for all you do.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you for all that you're doing, your resource church leaders. I'm so grateful, and we're cheering you on over here at Vanderbloemen.